Thank you, Leonie. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Mr. Graham Parrott, the presiding officer, to deliver his speech and also the message from the Honourable Peter Dutton, MP, the Minister for Immigration and Border Protection. Mr. Parrott, MP, please.
Thank you very much. Lewis, is it? Yeah. Yes. Lewis Lee, yes. Thank you very much for hosting us today. Lewis is conducting his 31st citizenship ceremony today, so I think that's worth a round of applause as well. And all our distinguished guests, could I particularly start by acknowledging Ken Rong and pass on behalf of all Australians and all Queenslanders, our thoughts to the Queensland Police Service this week in what has been a very, very difficult week. And I thank you for the service that you do every day that you put on that uniform. So thank you. To Surendra, that I'm doing some great work on the Indian War Memorial Committee. I look forward to that event taking place, and I know that the other elected representatives here, Stephen and Kim and Peter and Duncan, are also very supportive of your work that you're doing. To Janice and to all of the team at World Arts and Multiculture conducting your 16th ceremony, thank you for that service that you do to your community. As volunteers, it's a very important part of becoming an Australian citizen is having a community group that steps up to conduct the ceremony. And it's certainly something I'm proud to be associated with. And I also particularly wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners and thank them for their strong and continuing stewardship. Now, before I was a politician, I was a lawyer. Before I was a lawyer, I was a school teacher. Now, I taught English and geography mainly, but I also taught a little bit of history. So, because I don't get to teach kids anymore, I thought because I have a captive audience, I'm going to give you a little bit of Australian history. A little bit. Now, the Indigenous Australians say that Australia was formed forever ago by the rainbow serpent creating the nation, the island of Australia at the beginning of time. Anthropologists say that it might have been more like 60,000 or 100,000 years ago that there were waves of Indigenous Australians came to this land. When they came, they changed this country. Significantly changed this country, particularly by their hunting of megafauna and also by regularly burning off the bush. It changed the nature of the country so that there's more grasslands. More grasslands meant more animals like kangaroos, which meant there was more animals to trade, to hunt down. Then there have been interactions with other nations, other people. The first sort of significant group might be the Macassan traders who came to the northern part of Australia to harvest sea cucumbers, where they used to regularly visit and regularly trade with the Indigenous Australians, perhaps for 600, 700, 800 years. So you think that Australians would have been comfortable with Muslims arriving in boats, but they've been a little bit uncomfortable of late. But the Macassan traders, Muslims from the north of Australia, used to regularly come. And then there were Dutch sailors and Portuguese sailors, and Portuguese sailors like Torres, so the Torres Strait, Tasmania named after Abel Tasman, many other people that used to come. And then a young English lieutenant, later a captain, but a lieutenant at the time, came in 1770 after doing a lap around New Zealand. Are there any New Zealanders here today? Okay, a couple. All right, so Lieutenant James Cook did a lap around New Zealand, found the Maori a little bit fierce and hard to deal with, so didn't claim New Zealand particularly, came over to the east coast of Australia, sort of hit down around the Victoria-New South Wales border, and then went north, naming things along the way. So where there was lots of flowers and things in Botany Bay, he called that Botany Bay. Mount Warning, the Glasshouse Mountains just north of Brisbane, naming things all the way along. And then when he got to a place which we now call Cooktown, his boat, the Endeavour, hit the Great Barrier Reef, and he had to settle up there for a while to repair the ship. And there is a story, I haven't been able to get it confirmed, but there is a story that when he spoke to the local Indigenous Australians, and it sort of said, "What's that?" It was a big animal with a pouch and big tail, and they didn't know what he was pointing at, and they thought that he was saying, "What is that?" So, which was the word they used was kangaroo, but he pointed at that animal, and it was a kangaroo. Then, going further north, right to the tip of Queensland, on the 22nd of August 1770, just before sunset, Lieutenant James Cook landed on an island owned by the Kurrareg people called Beddanug or Bedamlug. And this is what he said. This is a quote from Lieutenant Cook's journal. "I now once more hoisted English colours, and in the name of His Majesty King George III, took possession of the whole eastern coast by the name New South Wales, together with all the bays, harbours, rivers and islands situated upon the said coast." Now the name of that island, which is Bedamlag to the local people, he called Possession Island, as in I take possession of all of Australia for King George III of England. Okay, and then I'm going to rush through the next bit of history, because there was, the 1788, the first fleet came out, 11 ships land around Sydney. We had some gold rushes. We had a lot of Chinese people come to Australia back in the 1890s and settle up looking for gold, and then became successful farmers and business people. 1901, the colonies got together and said we should form a country. They sent off some rules, which we now call the Constitution, sent them over to the English Parliament, and the English Parliament said, all right, we'll pass that law and create a country called Australia. Queen Victoria signed the piece of legislation and said, yep, you're a country. And then we've got a constitution where these colonies came together to form a country. That was the country kicked off on the 1st of January 1901, going through until 1967, something significant happened. Now, it's hard to change the constitution in Australia. You need the majority of the people to vote yes, and also a majority of the states. 42 times we've had a referendum, and only 8 times have we changed. Well, in 1967, 50 years ago, the people of Australia, nearly 91% of them said we should recognise Indigenous Australians. Because before then, Indigenous Australians were not in our nation's birth certificate. There's something called the race powers still in the Constitution, where colonies could make decisions, or states as they became, could make decisions about Indigenous people, or any other race for that matter. Okay, but the Indigenous Australians weren't in the Constitution. It's all right, there's no Prime Minister in the Constitution either. They forgot to put that in, but we still have Prime Ministers. All right, so 1967, go forward a few years till about 1982, where 3 blokes, one called David Passy, another called James Rice, and another called Eddie Mabo, got together. Now, these 3 were all what are called Miriam people from the Torres Strait, and they commenced proceedings in the High Court, which is the highest court in Australia, in 1982, saying they wanted to challenge the law of England, which then became the law of the colony, which then became the law of Australia, and say, we actually own these Miriam Islands. That started in 1982. Now, sadly, in January of 1992, 10 years later, one of those people, Eddie Mabo, actually died in January. But on the 3rd of June, I say that date because you will remember this date, 25 years ago today, on the 3rd of June 1992, the High Court said that is correct. Indigenous Australians were here. Torres Strait Islanders did own this land before Lieutenant James Cook put the flag in the ground on that island, Possession Island, and said, I take possession of this continent. Okay, so today you're becoming an Australian citizen 25 years to the day since the High Court said Australia actually did have original inhabitants beforehand. Because Australia was settled, unlike New Zealand, Australia was settled under this concept called terra nullius, which is Latin for the land of nobody. The land of nobody, even though, Captain Cook and Arthur Phillip had regularly dealt with Indigenous Australians. So, when we normally start an event, we often, like Lewis did, acknowledge the traditional owners. It's more than just an acknowledgement. It's because the High Court on this day said Indigenous Australians are a big part of this country. More work to be done. 50 years since we had that referendum, but still the Indigenous Australians are not on our nation's birth certificate, the Constitution. And there will be much to discuss, and you will get to vote. You will get to vote in a referendum about how we might recognise Indigenous Australians. After today, when you are an Australian citizen, you will be involved in that process. So you remember that today, you became an Australian citizen on the day, 25 years since that High Court decision. Now, the court says one thing, it's then up to a parliament to reflect that. And 1 year later, in 1993, we had something called the Native Title Act, but I could bore you about that later on when you're Australians, okay? My job is also to conduct this ceremony under the authority of the Minister for Immigration and Border Protection, the Honourable Peter Dutton. I'll now read out a message from Minister Dutton, and the Minister says, Australia stands proud in today's world, recognised for defending the values, rights and obligations which will stand us in good stead for as long as we embrace them. The history and culture of Australia has been forged over thousands of years, first through Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and more recently with people from the four corners of the earth. Australians are proud of having survived and thrived as a nation following the cruelty of world wars, depression, drought and flood. As a result of this rich history, today we stand with other strong democracies to help defend and protect our hard-fought freedoms. People of all backgrounds and religions strengthen our country, and only together, united, will our future be as strong as our present and past. Thank you for taking this important step today. Australian citizenship confers on you great benefits, but equally rights and obligations. Congratulations and best wishes, the Honourable Peter Dutton, MP, Minister for Immigration and Border Protection. Thank you.